So I do appreciate what all of you do, and I lament that I don't have the opportunity, or time I should say, I had the opportunity but no time, to go through the wonderful poster that I saw some of you have prepared. I'm pretty sure they are all exciting, and if I had the time, I would feel really, really excited about what you do at Western. But please know that at a superficial level, I'm very much aware of the important contributions some of you make. I know how important imaging research has been to Western, and I brag about your work all the time. So one of the, I guess, advantages, benefit, if you will, privilege that I have as president is to talk about some of the wonderful things that we do. So then, of course, if the conversation goes further, then you have to call in the experts. Then you have to look for, Andrea, Aaron, to explain, what goes on. So again, thank you for inviting me. And I have been given my marching orders. I don't know whether they came from you or not. Certainly, the marching orders that I received is that you want me to talk about our strategic plan, and I'm happy to do so. And at the end of the day, if we have time, I'll be happy to entertain any questions, either on the strategic plan or any other matter that you choose to ask me on. But let me focus on the strategic plan. So I'll tell you a little story. A long time ago, when I was a rookie dean, that was many, many years back. So I decided that I really didn't know much about the dean's job. So I decided to sign up for what is fondly called as the dean's course. It's actually called SUAC, Senior University Administrative Course, held in Banff. So we showed up. The class was really a rebellious group. So day one, we decided that we are going to take charge, and the three instructors, seasoned administrators, they are not going to have much to say as to how we're going to conduct ourselves. So first thing that presented to us is a program. And the program was very tight, lengthy, and there was a segment where we are required to return after dinner. So this is the Banff Conference Center, and we're going to have dinner in downtown Banff. And we made a collective decision, although we hardly knew each other, that we are not coming back after dinner. So we told our instructors, whatever you have to do, you have to pack it in between now and dinner time. After that, we are not coming back. And they heeded our advice, if you will. So at that point in time, the story I wanted to tell is connected to Western. So one of the leaders was then the VP Administration of Western, Peter Mercer. I don't know whether some of you remember Peter. He was formerly Dean of Law. So Peter had the section that talked about strategic planning. Not that we didn't believe strategic planning, so it is now day 3 or 4. By that time, we sized up our instructors. We said they can be challenged, and we simply decided to challenge them on everything they would say to us. So Peter's point was strategic planning is important, and we took the collective view that strategic planning is irrelevant within the context of a university. And here I am, several years later, trying to tell you about strategic planning. So take it with a little bit of grain of salt. Let me tell you how the process began. So we started the process early in November. Of course, I believe in strategic planning. So it is just my attempt, or our attempt, to give Peter a hard time. And when maybe I should tell you one more thing. When I was appointed, I was named president, Peter sent me a wonderful note from another university in New Jersey now. And I couldn't resist the temptation of reminding Peter. I said, Peter, I'm not quite sure that you want to congratulate me. You may not remember, actually, I was one of your students at this course in Banff. And he responded very quickly, I do. So anyway, we began in November. We visited with all the faculties, and some of you met me and Provost at one of the sessions. And on top of that, we received about 200 written inputs from individuals, of course, consisting of faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community members. We had submissions from 40 stakeholder groups. So the numbers may not look very impressive, but those of you who are familiar with this sort of process, actually they're not bad. So one of the characteristics of our university community, not just Western, anywhere else, is that everybody has opinion and say, but when given the opportunity, very few actually express those opinions because it takes hard work to write things down. So 200 submissions, not bad from that point of view. So we produced a draft. So the draft is very simply put, trying to digest all the input that we got and try to put it in some sort of framework. So it's really a very raw draft. Then we had a debate among our leadership team. So the draft is not, from my point of view, ready actually to be put out because it's not a polished document. And in some cases, things do not quite fit in. Then we said, well, we want to go to our community, at least a select group, with this raw draft so that we can benefit from their input. So of course, select groups would be Senate, the Board of Governors, and so on. So the raw draft, as we speak right now, is under review by Senate and soon to be reviewed by our Board of Governors. And the reason we didn't put it out in public is that because it's not a polished document, we didn't want to embarrass ourselves. But yet at the same time, if we produce a polished document, then what happens is it becomes a little bit late in the process for you to receive and accommodate significant feedback. So our plan is to have that draft reviewed by these two bodies of the university, and then when we hear from them, get their initial reaction, we'll be revising it. So the second draft will be the draft that will be broadly circulated to the community. It'll be put up on our web. And after that, then we'll invite comments. So right now, after that, I think unless we have missed the boat completely, the room for significant modification would be rather limited. And then finally, it is our goal to have it all done by the fall. So I don't think that's what you wanted me to talk about. I think what you probably would be interested in is that what are the key themes that are emerging. So before I list those, let me tell you that those of you who have followed the journey of this university, none, hopefully, will surprise you. So these are my choices. When you have this broad consultative process, what do you come up with? Really a document that has all sort of things. And in fact, the document as it stands now is about 10, 12 pages long. So when you read it, each page, each paragraph will make sense. But after you have gone through it, then you are not quite sure what all this means, right? So I have taken the liberty of providing my own interpretation with my bias, with my dreams and goals for the university, to pick up 4 thrusts. At the end of the day, we may have more than 4. So first one is, I think we want to maintain and enhance our leadership position in terms of quality of education, quality of learning that we provide to our students. If you want to translate it in Western, I guess, parlance, you may say, well, we want to maintain that best student experience. The message I have picked up since my arrival is that that positioning has served us well, but it doesn't capture everything that we do. So for example, it doesn't capture the graduate component, postdoctoral component as well, or it doesn't capture our research component. So we don't want to abandon that reputation that we have built up, but we want to enrich it. So we are trying to find a way of finding more, if you will, of an academic meaning to that best student experience. Left to me, if I were here when you're coining it, I would have debated that we shouldn't be describing it best student experience, but best learning experience or something like that, to be more inclusive. So, but the bottom line is, leaving aside, what nomenclature one may or may not use, I think we want to maintain our leadership position because that's our strength. It has served us well, and we have done extremely well. We continue to do extremely well. And I'm happy to elaborate later during Q&A. So you'll see lots of elements that kind of tries to reinforce that leadership position. And the reason we need to do this is very simple. Number one, we want to do the best thing that we can for our students. Number two, not in the same league, but others have taken notice. Others have taken notice of our success and success of an institution like ours. So competition is trying to achieve what we have achieved. So if we didn't do anything more, actually we will not be able to maintain our leadership position forever. At some point in time, somebody else will come up. So that's one. Second one is probably more closer to what your seminar or your get-together is all about, is really building our research strength. So while I was very bullish on the first thrust that you're going to talk about, the second one, I remain optimistic, but I'm not in a position to say that we have a leadership position across the board. And you all know that. And one of the joys of my arrival at Western, our medical school was the first faculty I felt. So you are trying to size up the community that you have just become part of. So what is the sense of the community? Who are my allies? I felt in my first meeting with the leadership team of the medical school that the kind of observation that I was making in my early days and the aspirations Schulich School had, I think they came together. At least I felt that resonance with you. So with that in mind, you know that we have some work to do. Many ways of looking at it. No matter how you slice it and dice it, what we find is that we find ourselves in 10th position in terms of our research performance. So that's how our reputation is. On McLean's conducts its survey, you look at all these things, they find us in that 10th position. And then when you look at various parameters, whether it's input, output, actually, we are in that ballpark range. And suddenly I don't like it. I'm pretty sure many of you do not like it. And the reason I don't like it is that was not where we came from. We used to be in the top 5, 6 positions. So others have come along, right? I'm pretty sure you know the list. Ottawa has made significant progress over the years. So has Calgary. Saskatchewan has come along. So we have competition. The reason for my optimism is I do believe that we can get out of it, because I see lots of great things happening. And we have, of course, global excellence in certain clusters. So the term cluster will be repeated time and time again. So why is that? Well, number one, to start with, you cannot be good at everything. And even our medical school was not world-class at everything. A good friend of the school outside of Western now tells me when I seek his advice, a graduate of a residency graduate of Western, if you will. So he tells me that during his time when he was a resident here, there are 4 areas where Western was kind of national leader. I will not list all of those at the risk of offending some of you, but so let's just pick one. Family medicine. We wrote the book on family medicine. And then he would say that we are no longer the national leader. We are still very good. So we want to regain the sort of national leadership. Second one is really our environment. In a way, regrettably, Western has missed the boat. So over the last decade, when federal funding has more than doubled, right, somehow we have not been able to, we maintain our position, but we lost relative to others. So now we face a situation where we're trying to fix our research challenge, deal with the research challenge, at a time when federal funding is not going to grow. It's going to grow a little bit, but not that much. Provincial funding is on a decline. So if we just did the routine things that universities do, we'll make incremental progress, but it will not be enough for us to make a difference, for us to move up from our 10th, 9th position to the 5th or 6th position. So what you have to do is you have to step back and then focus. So there is the notion of cluster. So number one. Number two, we need to rebuild our talent trust, if you will. So you may or may not have noticed we launched a program. We are dubbing it as Brain Gain. So we have now allocated notional resources to attract 10 senior to mid-level faculty colleagues from other universities. And I make no apologies for recruiting talents from other places because they do the same thing from us. So 10 may not be enough, but 10 is a good starting point. So rather than just recruiting across the board for which we don't have resources, we have done that in the past. So we want to recruit selectively to boost our research clusters. Then notionally we targeted that in a broadly defined cluster, there's no hard and fast rule how you define clusters. It'll be up to you to define what a cluster may or may not look like. So we said we are going to support up to 4 clusters. And I certainly believe that either imaging or some parts of imaging combined with something else, would have the merit of, this is my personal view, of being part of a cluster or a separate cluster on its own. So second observation is that our history tells us, history of research, or success of Western. When we came together in an interdisciplinary manner, we have done wonderful things. All you have to do is hear the story of Henry Bernie, I should say. So if you hear this story of Bernie, you know what I'm talking about. So I'm a big fan of interdisciplinary work, and we have a very supportive environment that allows us to do that, partly because of who we are and where we are. We are located in the city of London, not in the city of Toronto. We are each other's neighbors and so on and so forth. So we have a good track record of doing it, and we have better possibility than others to do it. So as central administration, our role is really to support those sort of things. There are lots of barriers. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with them, but we want to tackle those barriers one at a time. So last point I'll make would be we also want to do something that universities generally find it difficult to do. Work with partners. As much as we can work within our university, because of all sort of good reasons, it is actually difficult for us to work with other partners, whether they're another research institution, another university in this country or beyond, or for that matter, corporate partners. So because I know it's so difficult for all those reasons, in my way of thinking, the institutions who are able to work in partnership with others will have certain built-in advantage in what they do. So we'd like to seek some of those strategic partnerships. So the partnerships in the area of medical research could be partnering with GE, for example, in imaging. I don't know which company you work with, but something like that. But not just work on projects, but to make them, make them think that Western or components of Western is a strategic partner. So that's my bullet 2, or cluster 2, if you will, thrust 2. Number 3, internationalization. You heard me speak on numerous occasions why that is important. So people then say, what does it mean? Of course, you can bring it to a level where people can relate to what it means. So to me, the single most important reason for us to be promoting internationalization is really for our students. I say, what sort of leaders, what sort of citizens we'll need to be able to function in an increasingly global neighborhood. I was to describe it a global village. We had a wonderful honorary degree recipient yesterday. She described it as a global neighborhood. So I said to her, I'm going to use the term neighborhood because I like it better. So in the past, universities, if you look at the history of universities, we educated leaders of our communities, of our societies. So when you think of it from that point of view, so I don't mean political leaders, business leaders, university leaders. I mean leaders across the board, a very broad definition. Well, they needed to learn certain things, right? And many of those needs are still valid. But I argue that in an increasingly global neighborhood, leaders of today, leaders of tomorrow must also be global citizens. Otherwise, they will not be able to succeed. So even if you look at it from narrow perspective, business perspective. If you want to run a successful business in Canada, you are not going to be successful unless you run a small grocery shop somewhere. If you run anything bigger than that, you are not going to be successful if you don't go global. Look at the success of many of our companies. They're only successful because of the global businesses. Open Text is one company from Kitchener-Waterloo area that I'm familiar with, has done extremely well. 80% of Open Text business is international, including Germany. So you're not just talking about China and those sort of things. So only global businesses are going to succeed. So that's part of it. Second one is research activity. As we gain increasing capacity to tackle some of the complex challenges that we are facing, those challenges tend to be global in nature. I refer to Global Challenges Canada. So those of you who haven't followed it, deals with global health. Very interesting concept. The concept is so powerful. Other countries are now emulating Canada's leadership in looking at challenges, the kind of challenges, global challenge Canada is looking at. So Australians, British, South Africans are trying to come up with their own global challenge type of activity. And the last one, which is really the tools. So to do all of those things, we need resources. Right? And by tradition, academy is not comfortable talking about resources. As somebody who was responsible for the budget of the university for 8 years at my previous institution, I can tell you that if you don't have resources, there's not much you can do. I started the premise that we don't have any shortage of great ideas. Universities are all about ideas. So that's not our bottleneck. We have lots of ideas. But we don't necessarily have the resources to support those ideas. So we'll never have enough resources, because just imagine how dreadful it would be if we had lots of money but we didn't know what to do with those. Right? That situation will never arise within the context of a university. So I take it for granted that we have lots of ideas, but we don't have the means to realize some of them to their potential. So I focus a great deal on resources, revenues, and whatnot. And the quick, summary of my synopsis on that is, if you look at our history, we are a publicly funded university. If you looked at the resources that came to Western 25 years ago, we would have received 80% of our operating budget from the province of Ontario. Today, that number is about 44% and declining, because the province is cutting back and whatnot. Contrast that with the University of Michigan. So they receive about 15, 17% of their resources from the state of Michigan. State of Michigan is in bad shape. University of Michigan actually is not in as bad shape as the state of Michigan is. Right? So it's not something that I like. It's a reality that I have come to recognize. And my thesis is very simple. I wouldn't say it outside publicly, because people will misinterpret it. But within the Western family, and I have no hesitation in telling you that our future is going to be bleak if we continue to rely on provincial funding. I would even say our future would not still look very good if we continue to rely on government funding in general. When I say government funding, not only our ministry, all the different ministries of the province and the feds and whatnot. And why is that? Very simply put, is really healthcare. Public dollars are going to be consumed in increasing proportion by healthcare, and you know the reason better than I do. Demographics, advances in healthcare, and so on. So what do we need to do? Now the prescription part. A typical strategic plan will not have much to say about this. But I would like our strategic plan actually to recognize some of those imperatives so that we keep our focus on that. So we are going to have a small but powerful and useful section on income diversification, so whatever it means. And then we are also going to have some statements on resource utilization. Right? So the example of that, we have spent a lot of money on buildings. Right? It took me some time to realize what we were doing. And I've asked my colleagues to review what we are doing. Right? I can give you examples. I will not, because it will take too much time. I'm not convinced that for all of our capital projects have been strategically thought through. So I'll just give you one example. Renovation cost, these are hypothetical numbers. Let's say renovating a building as good as it is, if it costs $400 per square foot, $450 per square foot, and when you renovate buildings, you don't have complete freedom. And yet, when you can build a new building, our medical education building, you don't hold me to these numbers. I'm not very good in numbers. It's at $300 per square feet. So I'm asking the question, why it is that we are not building some more new buildings like the $300 building and spending $450 trying to renovate. So that's one example of resource allocation, because we have limited resources. If we don't apply those resources carefully, strategically, then we are not going to be successful. So 4 themes: maintaining our leadership position in student learning, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, building our research strength through support of interdisciplinary clusters, internationalization of student learning and research activity. Let me just give you one more challenge you have on student learning. When we say, it is a good idea for our students to get some experience studying with others in a foreign country, we all say yes. Not 100%, but majority will say, yeah, that's a great idea. Then when you ask them, well, would you please remove the barriers that you have put in as faculty members through faculty council? We don't recognize credits for courses taken at some of the world's greatest universities and not so known universities. We can have it both ways. We can say this is important and say we don't recognize that learning experience. So there are lots of those barriers that are in our hands. They're not resource driven. There's some element of it resource driven, but whether we recognize credit taken at University of Paris or Amsterdam is up to us. So we need to focus on that. And the last one, of course, the other part of that internationalization is research activity. So anything we can do to partner with others. One of your graduate of our medical school, I forget the name, a fairly young man has the title of Deputy Dean or Associate Dean at Oxford Medical School. And he told me that we have some unique database at Western that nobody else has it. And he said, well, that's a wonderful possibility for Oxford and Schulich Medical School to be partnering, because you have the database we don't, and they need the database. Don't ask me what that database is all about. All I know is that we have some special database that they don't. And the last one is really diversifying our revenue stream and strategic allocation of resources. So those are 4 thrusts that I have picked up personally, and we'll see how the process unfolds. So I'll end with that note. Andrea, whoever is moderating, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
When I first met you about 4 years ago, you talked about thinking big.
Yes.
That was the big theme. And today, your message is not so dissimilar from what we are hearing from the healthcare sector. Mm-hmm. Resource allocation, some of the challenges that we're all going to be facing. But you touched on something about diversifying and getting different resources. Can you sort of expand on that?
Sure.
What are the sort of thoughts?
Sure. Well, those simple things. So rather than going to our Ministry of Universities for funding, where we get our core funding. So if you just broaden that and went to Ministry of Health, it would be close to you, a Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Transport. So we broadened the base. So that's one. And then if you look,
Ministry of Health is broke.
and then, but remember, even when we are broke too. But our budget still is $670 million. So when we need to find that $1 million, I'm not responsible for budget, so easy for me to say this. But I tell our vice president, if this is important for the university, and if you're telling me that we can't find $1 million, something is wrong with us, because we have $670 million worth of budget. I know how difficult it is, but I want to make sure that our important projects are supported. So that's That's point number one. Governments. So, historically, we just relied on the province for operating money, federal government for research money. So you diversify that. So how do you diversify it? Every little bit counts. We got $10 million from the City of London to set up our advanced manufacturing park. So in the past, we would not have looked to municipal government for that sort of money. So that's a plus. There's an agency called FedDAD. So their role is to promote economic development in southern or southwestern Ontario. So we managed to secure $12 million from there. So again, diversifying. So leave the government aside. We are raising money now. We're doing fundraising. And we are a little bit behind other institutions in terms of fundraising. 7% of our alumni give on a regular basis. And if you just know how strongly our alumni feel about Western, I can give you a good comparison between my experience at Waterloo, where I spent 8 years of my life, and my 4 years at Western. There's no match in terms of alumni affinity towards Waterloo and Western. And yet, Waterloo will be in double digits. So these are numbers that are kind of difficult to compare because there is no standard way of reporting. But I know that's higher than 7%. Waterloo is only 55 years old. So there is no reason why our number has to be at 7, why it cannot be at 14. So the average giving, when we think of giving, people are thinking of the Labatts, the Ivies, large giving. I'm more interested in small giving, because that's more sustainable, that's more practical for us. So the average amount of giving is less than $300. I know in my travels that there are many, many Western graduates who can write a check a lot bigger than $300. $1,000 probably would be a good number to aim for. So with this $300 level, 7% support, we bring in $50–60 million. So if 7% becomes 14%, $300 becomes $600, then I think we can bring in close to $200 million or $150 million. So our aim is to go to 100 first. So this year, our target was 70. We fell short because one major gift did not come to fruition. So we got 65. So 65 is better than 50, where you started from. So we want to ramp it up. So that's one. And then finally, also programming. We not only are tied by government regulations as to the level of grant that we get, and there is no inflationary adjustment. Our grants remain frozen for decades, grants for students. On top of that, they tell us how much we can charge for our student fees. I know that lots of students here or postdocs, so nobody wants to pay more. But let me share some numbers with you. Then you'll see the challenge. If you just looked at our overall budget, in your spare time, don't take time away from your research. Look at our overall budget, divided by the number of students we have, and you'll come up with average cost per student at Western. So the number would be around $16,000, $17,000, $18,000, depending on which figures you use. So how much we get for an average Western student? We get about $7,000 from government. We get $6,000, $7,000 average from students. So for each student we take, we have a deficit of $4,000 to $5,000. If you run a business like that, you'll go bankrupt. So how do you manage? Well, we do it better than others, but in general, we have been managing by taking more students. The student-faculty ratio go up, but that's not a sustainable model. At some point in time, that model will crash. So what we are doing is we are looking at diversifying our tuition fee revenue stream. International students provide one source, and if you have to create a new section, new program for international students, business model will not work. But international students generally pay about $15,000, $17,000, whatever our average cost is. They are not subsidized. But when they are incremental, if you can take 5 more students in your class and so on, so they bring that incremental benefit to Western. Over the last 4 years, our international student revenue has grown from $9 million to $26 million. So these are some of the various things that we can do. Master's program, your Master of Public Health. So that'll be hopefully a self-sustaining program. So I hope you get some flavor of it. But your question number one is a very important one, and I'm glad you reminded me of those big ideas. Guess what? I'm still looking for big ideas. Right? So I'll tell you, where we are after 4 years. This is my failure, our collective failure. After 4 years, if I ask our development office today, I'm also playing the role of acting vice president advancement. I said, give me 7 or 8 big projects that we can ask our volunteers to go and raise 10 million or more. We can hardly find any. We had to actually work hard to put together 2 packages. And this is the real story. So we're trying to chase 2 $10 million type of donations. We had to work really hard, right, at our level, at bureaucratic level, to put together a proposal. So what I have challenged my colleagues, the deans, I said, boy, this is not going to work because we're not going to be able to raise $100 million or reach our $750 million target just by doing what we've been doing. We need some of those $10 million plus donations. And by the way, at Western, we didn't have too many of those $10 million donations. Other universities have had. And part of the difficulty is that we don't have packaged big ideas. We have great pieces here and there. So the Dean's Retreat, at my request, in August, will be solely focusing on big ideas. So I want to see what we have, and then we'll see what we can come up with. So I know that Mike Strong told me, I hope I'm not quoting something that is not correct, that you are going through a process of coming up with big ideas. And I'm waiting to hear from you, through the Dean, what those big ideas are. And he told me that he'll deliver those big ideas to us in the fall. So that's your opportunity. And we need them. And without you, we can't cook up big ideas. They have to come from you.
Thank you.